There's a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Not because they don't know it exists, but because the honest answer terrifies them. The question is this: when the doing is done, when the career has run its course, the children have grown, the identity you built for 50 years no longer needs maintaining, what will be left of you? Carl Jung watched thousands of people arrive at the threshold of old age, and he observed something that broke his heart as a physician and fascinated him as a psychologist. Most of them arrived unprepared. Not financially, not physically. They had planned for retirement. They had the savings, the medications, the arrangements. What they had not planned for was the interior, the self, the vast, quiet country of who they actually were, beneath the titles, the roles, the decades of useful busyness. And without preparation, that country felt like a wasteland. But Jung also watched a different kind of person grow old, people who had done something he considered both radical and rare, people who arrived at the afternoon of life not diminished, but distilled, not narrowing toward an end, but expanding toward a completion. He understood exactly what made the difference. It came down to 4 pillars. And they will change everything about how you think about aging, starting right now. In 1931, Jung wrote an essay called The Stages of Life. In it, he used one of the most precise and beautiful metaphors in the history of psychology. He compared a human life to the arc of the sun across the sky. The morning of life, childhood through early adulthood, is the sun rising. Everything is expansion. You are building an identity, a career, relationships, a place in the world. The energy moves outward. The imperative is to grow, achieve, establish, accumulate. This is the correct program for the morning. But here is what Jung said with a clarity that most of the world still has not absorbed. You cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of the morning. He wrote, what was great in the morning will be of little importance in the evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie. The person who carries the morning's program, the striving, the accumulating, the endless outward-directed achieving, into the afternoon of life will pay, Jung said, with damage to their soul. This is the clinical origin of the midlife crisis, of the elder who still competes with the young, of the retiree who loses their sense of self the day their title disappears. The first pillar of a happy old age is the one that makes all others possible, the deliberate, courageous turning inward. Jung was precise about this. He wrote, for the aging person, it is a duty and a necessity to devote serious attention to himself. Duty, necessity, not hobby, not luxury, not something to pursue if time allows after the grandchildren's schedules are managed. A requirement. The turning inward means something specific in Jungian psychology. It means the energy that spent the first half of life building outward, the career, the family, the social identity, must now be redirected toward the interior, toward self-knowledge, toward the integration of all the parts of the self that were set aside during the busy decades, toward the question not of what you have done, but of who you are. This is what Jung called individuation in its most mature form, not the individuation of the young person discovering their identity, but the individuation of the elder discovering their wholeness. In youth, individuation means becoming distinct. In old age, it means becoming complete. The parts of you that were suppressed because they were inconvenient, the creativity that got shelved when the career demanded all your time, the philosophical hunger that went unanswered during the years of practical necessity, the spiritual questions that were deferred to someday, those parts do not disappear. They wait. Old age, Jung believed, is not the conclusion of the self story. It is the chapter in which all the deferred material finally gets space to live. The elder who turns inward does not become self-absorbed. They become, for the first time, fully inhabited, fully present in their own life, and paradoxically, this is precisely what makes them most present and most valuable to everyone around them. The turning inward is the foundation. Everything else rests on it. When a journalist interviewed Jung on the occasion of his 85th birthday and asked him directly, what makes for happiness in the human mind, Jung's answer was not what the questioner expected. He did not speak about achievement. He did not speak about health first. His second response, delivered with the weight of a man who had spent 8 decades in intimate proximity to human suffering and human joy, was this: good personal and intimate relations, such as those of marriage, the family, and friendships. Not pleasant relations, not convenient relations, not the polite maintenance of social connections. Intimate relations, the word carries its full weight here. Jung understood something that modern loneliness research has since confirmed with extraordinary force. The quality of your relationships is not a feature of a good life, it is the architecture. The Harvard study of adult development, the longest study of human happiness ever conducted, concluded after 80 years and thousands of subjects what Jung already knew from the consulting room, that the single greatest predictor of health, happiness, and longevity in old age is not wealth, not status, not even physical fitness. It is the warmth of your relationships. But here is the Jungian depth beneath that finding. Jung observed that the people who arrived at old age most isolated were rarely people who had been unkind. They were people who had been defended, who had spent decades maintaining the persona, the polished social mask, at the expense of genuine intimacy, who had been present in their relationships without ever being truly seen in them. The second pillar of a happy old age is not simply having relationships, it is having relationships in which you are known. Not the version of you that performs, not the version of you that manages impressions and moderates vulnerability. The actual you, with the fears and the history and the still unresolved questions, known and loved not in spite of those things but sometimes because of them. This requires something Jung considered one of the most demanding psychological achievements of the second half of life, the willingness to let the persona down, to stop presenting the edited version and allow the real one to be present. For the people who manage this, old age becomes something extraordinary. The friendships that survive into old age, when all performance incentive is gone, when there is nothing left to compete for, those friendships reveal something about the nature of love that the young and busy rarely get to feel. Jung called this the love that no longer needs to prove itself. And he believed it was one of the purest forms of happiness available to a human being. The third pillar Jung named when asked about happiness is one that surprises people. Not because it is obscure, but because the culture we live in has trained us to treat it as decoration rather than necessity. Jung said the capacity to perceive beauty in art and in nature. He did not say the ability to produce beauty, though that too has value. He said the capacity to perceive it, to receive it, to allow it to enter you and do what beauty does when it is permitted to do its full work. Jung's framework helps us understand why beauty matters in ways that go far beyond aesthetics. In his understanding of the psyche, the experience of genuine beauty, a piece of music that stops time, a landscape that makes the ego go quiet, a work of art that somehow says the thing you always knew but never had the words for, is one of the primary ways the unconscious speaks to the conscious self. Jung called these encounters with beauty experiences of the numinous, a term he borrowed from the theologian Rudolf Otto, meaning an encounter with something that transcends ordinary consciousness, a moment in which the small, daily self briefly drops away and something larger moves through. For the elder who has developed the capacity to receive beauty, these numinous moments become a form of spiritual sustenance. This is why the people who age most consciously are so often people who have maintained or deepened their relationship with art, with music, with the natural world, not as distraction, as communion. And here is the specific gift beauty offers in old age that it cannot offer at any other time of life. It is one of the few experiences that returns us instantly to the present moment. The sunset does not care about yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's fears. The piece of music playing in a quiet room erases the CV, the diagnosis, the diminished status. For the duration of beauty, you are simply alive. Jung believed that a person who can still be moved by beauty, genuinely moved, not performatively appreciative, is a person whose soul is still open. And a soul that remains open does not grow old in the way we usually fear aging. It ripens. The fourth pillar is the most difficult. It is also, Jung believed, the most important, and the one almost no one in the modern world is willing to genuinely examine. He called it a philosophical or religious point of view capable of coping successfully with the vicissitudes of life. In his interviews, in his letters, in his clinical work, Jung was extremely specific about what this meant. It was not the passive holding of inherited beliefs. It was not the repetition of comforting formulas. It was not even necessarily conventional religious practice, though that could be part of it. It was the development of a personally held, genuinely examined framework for understanding why suffering exists, what death means, and how a human being can face the end of their life without the kind of terror that corrupts everything that precedes it. And here Jung said something that the modern world, with its relentless optimism and its collective phobia of mortality, has almost entirely refused to hear. He said we must make peace with death, not by pretending it isn't coming, but by understanding it as the completion of life's meaning, not its cancellation. He wrote, "As a doctor, I am convinced that it is hygienic, if I may use the word, to discover in death a goal towards which one can strive, and that shrinking away from it is something unhealthy and abnormal, which robs the second half of life of its purpose." Read that again. Shrinking from death does not make life more enjoyable. It robs the second half of life of its purpose. Jung had observed this with clinical precision. The people who spent their later years in a state of anxious denial, obsessively monitoring symptoms, compulsively trying to recapture youth, treating every sign of age as a personal failure, were not living more fully as a result of their vigilance. They were less alive. The terror of the end was consuming the experience of the middle. Whereas the people who had developed what Jung called a mature philosophy, a genuine, examined way of understanding mortality, of locating the life they had lived within some larger frame of meaning, those people did something extraordinary with their remaining time. They used it. They were present in a way that the terrified could not be. They had conversations the defended could not have. They were available for love, for beauty, for the quiet magnificence of an ordinary afternoon in a way that only someone who has accepted finitude can fully appreciate. In primitive cultures Jung studied throughout his career, elders were not hidden from view as they aged, they were elevated. They became, in his words, the guardians of the mysteries and the laws. Their proximity to death was not a diminishment, it was the very source of their authority. The fourth pillar is not resignation, it is not surrender. It is the discovery, arrived at through genuine philosophical and spiritual work, that life fully lived and consciously completed is not a tragedy. It is the point. I want to say something that Jung spent his entire career trying to say, and that Western culture has spent the same amount of time refusing to hear. Old age is not a diminished version of youth. It is a different season with its own purpose, its own beauty, its own form of power, a form that youth cannot access because youth has not yet earned the material it requires. Youth builds, old age distills, youth expands, old age deepens, youth asks what is possible, old age answers what was real. These are not lesser activities. They are in many ways the most significant activities a human being is capable of, and the culture that tells older people they are past their relevance, that equates slowing down with running out, is a culture that has confused the sun setting with the sun disappearing. The sun does not disappear, it completes its arc. Jung believed with absolute conviction that a human being would not live to 70 or 80 years old if that longevity served no purpose. He believed the afternoon of life contains gifts the morning is structurally incapable of offering: the freedom from performance, the perspective that comes only from having lived, the capacity for a kind of love, less conditional, less defended, less needy, that genuinely changes the quality of the lives it touches. But none of these gifts arrive automatically. They are not the passive reward of simply surviving. They are the fruit of conscious aging, of doing the interior work, of deepening the bonds, of remaining open to beauty, of developing a philosophy capacious enough to hold both life and death without flinching. The four pillars. They are not a program for old age. They are a program for the whole of a human life, and the person who begins building them now, at whatever age they are watching this, arrives at the afternoon prepared. Jung lived to 85. He worked, loved, thought, wrote, and remained genuinely, luminously alive until the very end. He was not the exception. He was the example.